I was lying in bed one Sunday evening when my partner decided she wanted to play Until Dawn, and I thought to myself, Until Dawn? That could be fun to research. Until Dawn is a game that was released as a PlayStation exclusive title in 2015. Developed by Supermassive Games and published by Sony Computer Entertainment, this game would bring a fresh view on an actions have consequences style of game. After the success of other Iceberg videos I have made, I wanted to make a video on an Until Dawn Iceberg, but I couldn't find one. So, instead, this video is going to be very similar to my Iceberg videos, but in a bit more of a discussion of cut content and hidden information for Until Dawn. So if you guys do enjoy this video, please consider subscribing. I've been putting a lot of effort into my videos recently, and subscribing really helps me out. Also, let me know what else you want to see down below. In reality, Until Dawn has 3 major endings, but with each character having the ability to live or to die, there are in actuality 256 different endings to the game, which makes Until Dawn one of the games with the highest amount of endings, and truly adds into the butterfly effect that this game has always been so fond of. There is some unreleased beta footage for Until Dawn, and it showcases the chapter where Mike and Jessica are walking to the cabin. The camera used in this one is the first person camera, which when you watch the footage doesn't look quite right. It was very interesting to see what the game was originally proposed to be, as much more of a first person horror title, much like Outlast, and it was more of a puzzle driven horror game as opposed to a cinematic horror game. And also, the gun that Mike used was much more frequently involved. The game feels much more like Resident Evil with this first person look. The Inpatient is an Until Dawn prequel that was released in 2018. The Inpatient is set 60 years before the events of Until Dawn, and the majority of the story takes place at Blackwood Pines Sanatorium, the place where Mike will chop off his fingers in the original game. Your character is a patient at Blackwood Pines and suffering from amnesia. The entire game is played in virtual reality, which gives it an even more horrifying vibe, as if there's a jump scare or a sense of horror, you can't escape the game, you can't look away because you're stuck inside the game. Rush of Blood is a different title to those of the original Until Dawn and the spin-off The Inpatient. Rush of Blood is a first-person rail shooter game mode, almost like an arcade or theme park ride, where you're going on a ride that is meant to represent a descent into madness, or Josh's descent into madness. About a year ago, Christian Leon, one of the 3D artists for Until Dawn, released some of his work that was in the game, including a voice changer that would have belonged to Josh. This makes me think that potentially Josh's reveal as the Psycho was not meant to be a surprise, but rather the characters at the Washington Lodge were actually meant to discover that he was the Psycho. There are quite a few continuity errors in the game. When you're outside the lodge at the beginning of the game, there are lights coming through the windows. However, when you go inside, all the lights are off. Also, regardless of how many injuries Emily will sustain, the recaps will always show her completely unscathed. Also, upon entering the room where all the bodies are hanging in Chapter 10, Sam and Mike would refer to them as bodies, plural. And this would still happen even if you'd saved everyone or there was one body, they would always be referred to as plural. At age 11, Josh is referred to a psychiatrist after an unknown event at school, and he began to take antidepressants for this. 9 years later, when his sisters vanished, it is found by Sam that Josh tried to commit suicide and began to overdose his medication. One thing that is very interesting about Josh's mental illness is that he expresses other symptoms that do not come with depression, such as delusion, detachment, disorganized speech, and hallucinations, which aren't actually symptoms of depression normally. So maybe Josh was misdiagnosed, and his medication was actually not doing anything to help him. Josh's mental health problem is called psychological schizophrenia. Similarly to the continuity errors, there are also quite a few factual errors within the game, such as Hannah, despite having Beth's sweater and jacket, realistically would have died from her injuries or even from hypothermia before hunger started to overcome her. Also, in the sanatorium, Mike is able to shoot a double-barreled shotgun more than twice without any need to reload. Also, electric power in the mines and sanatorium still works despite the areas being the power would have long since been rerouted by them. Now this one is interesting. Will Biles recently said in an interview that it was originally planned for one of the characters to get pregnant. However, this was cut due to it detracting from the main story. A pregnancy storyline would have been good, but the problem with it is that a pregnancy storyline is quite a huge plot point, and therefore incorporating this would have meant it became one of the main story points, detracting from the Wendigos, the arsonist, and even the psycho. Any game is going to have bugs and glitches, and a game as complex as Until Dawn is bound to have as well. If Ashley walks close to the left in Chapter 6 in the basement during the jump scare, the flying object, Ashley will walk through a pillar in front of her. When Jessica reappears in her full outfit and is shown to be alive in Chapter 9, the whole segment can sometimes be very, very glitchy. And finally, when Chris is running away from the Wendigo in Chapter 8, his head goes through a branch. Similarly, Emily's head will go through a pipe in the sewers briefly. On the Until Dawn subreddit, there was a poll about who was the hardest character to save in the game, and it came back to Matt. As if you're a first time player, you're working off totems quite a lot, but in the totems there is not enough evidence that you should save yourself as opposed to saving Emily, which means Matt is actually the hardest character to save for first time players. Matt is a little bit at a disadvantage. Until Dawn has so many Easter eggs for other iconic horror franchises, and these include the setting of the abandoned cabin being an Easter egg to The Shining, and also the light of my lifeline said by Mike being the same as what Jack says to Wendy in The Shining. The false protagonist at the start being similar to the setup of Psycho. Chris's hockey mask and Friday the 13th. Josh's Psycho costume being a rendition of Michael Myers in Halloween. The Psycho's methods of torture being like that of Jigsaw. The reveal about Josh being similar to Scream. And every trophy in the game is named after a horror movie. And believe it or not, there are many more, such as an Easter egg for Silent Hill 2. During the scene where Mike is exploring the sanatorium, the green jacket he is wearing and the flashlight and the environment is all a very large reference to Silent Hill 2. And believe it or not, so many more. Until Dawn officially started production in 2010 and was intended to be a PlayStation 3 title that was reliant on the PlayStation Move controllers, which were becoming very popular at the time. However, the game kept experiencing setbacks and design changes, such as the huge design shift of changing the camera, which meant the game was pushed back into 2014 instead. However, in the February 2012 demo, you actually have to use the PlayStation Move controllers, there's no way around it. The first butterfly effect that we see in the game comes down to whether or not Chris will shoot a squirrel, and then whether Jessica will throw a snowball at a bird. All of these things actually will impact Matt's death. If you're cruel to the animals, the elk at the top of the cliff will attack Matt and kill him. Again, Matt at such a disadvantage for new players. The main villains of the Until Dawn game are without a doubt the Wendigos. These creatures come from Native American Cree legends. When someone becomes possessed by the Wendigo spirit, they will turn into a cannibalistic monster. Hannah is actually possessed by Makapatu, who was the Wendigo that chased her and Beth at the beginning of the game. Makapatu roughly translates to the one who had big teeth, and in the lore is the strongest Wendigo of them all, and therefore Hannah is the strongest Wendigo. At the end of the game, unless you find a particular clue while playing as Sam, there is a credit scene which shows Josh succumbing to cannibalism, which would make him the next person to turn into a Wendigo. It also makes him the newest Wendigo. When in the game's incarnation phase, the game was proposed to be a first-person title, but when Bars began to experiment with an in-game debug camera, the switch to third person was made. Bars found that when they were using a first-person camera, due to the only source of light often being a flashlight, they couldn't quite get the lighting right. So when Bars began to mess with the debug camera, he found that he could get a much more cinematic feel to the game, to create a greater sense of horror. This would also include QTEs, and much, much more. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you did enjoy it as much as I enjoyed making it. I know it was a bit of a shorter iceberg video, but it was quite hard to do this without actually having a physical iceberg to refer to. So I had to work a lot on based on what I was finding out, what I was researching, and this is probably the iceberg video that has taken me the longest to make. So if you did enjoy it, please do subscribe. Also, I really want to know what you guys want me to do. So let me know down below. I've taken a brief break from streaming at the moment to focus solely on the YouTube side of things. And I have multiple videos planned all throughout October for spooky season. Anyway guys, without any further ado, thank you for watching. I'll catch you all later. Bye bye.